I have been thinking for about a couple months or so about preaching on this subject. I haven't done it since I've been here, I guess, 10 years. And by the way, if this were really a good way to do it, we'd have a 2 or 3 hour Bible class, but our format doesn't allow that, and I realize that your brain can only absorb what your seat can stand, and that's probably 20 minutes. So we're going to have to break this up over a period of time. Now, if you think I'm going to quote a few scriptures and we're going to just be done, that's another problem, because I can't do that. It's going to take a while to accomplish this, because we just talked about a scripture that's significant. It arches over everything that I want to say, and that is, how do we maintain unity over anything? But when it comes to the idea of singing a cappella, as we're doing this morning, or singing with instruments, the major question for me is not, does someone use an instrument? The major question for me is, do they love Jesus? Do they know Jesus? Do they understand who Jesus is? That's the most important question that could ever be discussed. Do they know the Bible? Do they understand this? Is this significant to them? Does this settle all questions that can be brought up? The instrumental music question would be somewhere down a list, somewhere, that I could work in with some scriptures, as we'll do. But instrumental music is definitely what I would never start if I were going to talk to anyone about anything significant, because that would be Jesus, and the Bible has a lot to say about him. It's not the defining thing for me. I've been singing a cappella most of my entire life. But as important as that is to me, I'm saying this, I'm repeating it, I know. But as important as that is to me, why haven't I taught on it more? Because I don't think it's the thing to lead with. On the other hand, if we never talk about it, then we lose the reason why we practice what we do. Here are some things that people may say when they describe us. And by the way, if you're visiting with us today, I didn't get to say it. I'm glad you're here. This probably may not mean anything to you, and I hope that perhaps it will if you're able to come back over a period of time. Here are some things that words with people uses or phrases they will use when they talk about. One is, you're the ones who don't believe in music, or you're the ones that don't have music. And that would be a misnomer, because we have music. We had some very great music this morning that Mike has directed us in. We have a lot of music. By the way, I don't have an axe to grind. I'm concerned how I say what I'm going to say. So don't think I'm up here to dig a hole or to poke at something or to grind an axe. I just have some facts that I need to share with you as we wade out into this study. We have a lot of singing. We believe in it. If it were up to me, we sang, well, I think the outline shows 7 songs this morning. If it were up to me, we'd sing 10 or 11. I come Sundays to sing. I want to worship God in song. I'm not saying the communion's unimportant. I'm not saying what I'm doing is unimportant. I'm just saying one of the things that I enjoy doing is singing. Do you know that most of the songs that we sing are just slightly over 2 minutes? A lot of them are under a minute, but some of them are just over. So we just round that out and we go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If we double that, in 20 minutes, we can sing 10 songs. Now, sometimes we don't do that because someone gets up and they talk 2 minutes between each song. And when you do that, you can't get through 10 songs. But I like to sing. I've always liked to sing. It's deep inside me. But when you come to the the instrumental world, sometimes you will hear people sing maybe 3 or 4. They sing it right off of whatever radio they're on. They have people that are talented, and they play these instruments. The reason it's so short is because by the time they have an intro and an outro, and by the time they repeat some things and they have some solos, they don't have as much time. But we do believe in singing. Sometimes they will say, you don't have a piano, and that's probably the thing we're most noted for. You come in here and you don't see that. You don't see any kind of an instrument here. That's, by the way, that's low-hanging fruit. It's obvious. You come in and you see. That may be to the point when people come in, why don't you have one? But that's not in any way, shape, or form the whole picture. There are some people who have a deep appreciation for a cappella singing. When I was back in Fredericksburg, Texas with Levi, there was a friend came through who was a friend of the preacher's. And he came that day, and he was from a place where they used instruments. And afterward, I remember standing around, and he said, I am just absolutely amazed. He said, I didn't understand what 4-part harmony was or what it could sound like. And so that was his take on what he saw that day. He said, I'm not sure that you can do instruments like we do and have the kind of harmony that you have. All right. Sometimes we're known for what we have, not just what we don't have. I think we've all been to churches where the singing wasn't good. Now, it may have been a cappella, but musically it wasn't great. Now, I need to say this because this is important. God does not care how you sound. He wants you to sing, and he's looking at the heart. He's always looked at the heart. From the beginning with Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and all the things they went through, God is looking at the heart. So don't not sing because you say, well, I'm between one of those white notes and black notes on the piano. You sing and make melody in your heart because that pleases God. My point of not sounding good is if we're going to promote a cappella singing, we need to sing. You know, it amazes me sometimes when Mike, ain't man that leads singing, you know it. You're up here and you're just singing, and you just beat, you know, and you look out and somebody's not singing, and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You got a sore throat? You're not feeling well? I mean, how can you not be moved by what's going on? So we've been places where musically it wasn't great, and again, for me it's not significant, but for people who come to visit, it's significant. If we sound like one stomach pump calling its mate, probably not going to be a great memory. So not having a piano may be one thing that will lead people, that they'll lead with when they're talking about us. So how do we engage with our neighbors about the difference? The point, and this is the point I want to focus on. If someone is going to have a conversation with you, they start something with you, you and I need to be prepared to have a conversation. Some people have an adverse way of talking about it. They would say something like this. Well, you stupid turkeys, you sing with music. You just go ahead. You're going to hell, and you just go play for Satan. Not helpful. Not even close. In fact, it's totally abhorrent and wrong. If it's possible, Paul wrote to the Romans, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That's our goal. That's not just, he's just saying, Jerry, when it depends on you, it's your job to live peaceful. He didn't say you can have discussions and you can't have disagreements, but he says, as far as it's up to me, it's my job to be at peace with everyone. Why? Because I represent Jesus. if someone starts to say to us, you're the ones who, whatever they say, I would suggest that you and I need to be able to productively engage in a conversation. So we have things to think about because there's a difference. Anytime there's a difference, we should be able to examine it and look at it and engage in it and say things that are proper. How self-conscious about this should we be? How corrective, internally or externally, should we be? The majority of the world around us in America use an instrument. That's just a fact in 2025. Is it better to join the majority? In other words, if the majority use that, is it better to join the majority to smooth things out rather than to have any kind of conversation? Some people don't like conversation or conflict. Is it better to say, well, instead, if I can't beat them, I'll just join them? That's how some churches solve the problem. So people, because they've been around churches of Christ, where the singing was pleasant, they don't want to say anything. I've been there. And I've been the reason it wasn't pleasant. If I come in and sit on my bahunkus and I don't sing, then the problem is with me. He said, sing and make a melody, Jerry, in your heart to me. If it's not quality, that's hard to be fulfilled. You want good preaching? We do. We want good singing. We want thoughtful announcements. We want thoughtful prayers. We want someone like Rusty got up this morning and he gave us the announcements. He was organized. He had a message for us as we began. What I'm saying is this is not a judgment over and against someone's worship or their heart. It's important. This is not a judgment in that way. Are some people gifted at sculpting? There's some amazing things. One of my favorite things was in Russia every year during the Christmas holidays. And they would take and put these boxes together. And some fool, somebody who liked snow would stand inside that box and they would auger the snow in, and Mike, they would stomp that down until it was all stomped out throughout that box. And they did hundreds of those throughout the city. I always wondered what that guy looked like when he got out of there. But anyway, afterward, they would take those boxes off, and then they would sculpt those things into the most incredible. Sometimes in the middle of the city, there would be 25 or 30 different ones, but you could go over here a mile or two over here, you'd see more and more and more. Some people are talented. I watched one day. I said, here's a block of ice. What are you going to do with it? And in about 30 minutes, he had it transformed into something amazing. Not everybody has that gift. There are some people who are gifted to sing. There are some people who are gifted to speak. There are some people who come alongside and give hugs. And those, to me, are the really important people. I love when I see, we've got a lot of people who, when they see you, they got their arm out. You know, that's not to see, check if you have deodorant. They're trying to get you to put your arm out for a hug. People do that, and they say the things and the words that we need to hear that encourage us. And I just picked out 3, but if I looked out at all of you, I could spend 15 minutes saying, you're good at this, you excel at this. So there's a difference between the song each one of us has in our heart and the song that each one of us vocalizes, and the ability and the skill to do that well enough to lead others in it. Not everybody should be leading singing. Everybody must be studying their Bible. Everybody must be doing this, but not everybody, having done that, has the skill to organize the material in a way to teach the class. Now, I'm not suggesting, this is real important, I'm not suggesting that if you try something and it didn't work, you give up. I know people who said they couldn't do things. There was a guy that I knew, he said, man, I can't read. He used that excuse for years that he couldn't read. And then finally, he found out he could read. Not only could he read well, he wound up going to the school of preaching and was an amazing speaker in the Lord. But he had talents he didn't know he had because he'd never really explored them. It was like, nah, I can't do this. So if you're like most red-blooded Americans, because it doesn't work once, try it again. The reason is because the writer says use your gifts. Look at this. For by grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought. Period. I would have put a period right there. That's an amazing way to start talking about giftedness. But rather think of yourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. Just as each of you has one body and many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Do you understand that? I'm looking out at members that belong to one another. We're not all the same. That's what makes us a body of which Jesus is the head. He says we have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, use it in proportion to his faith. If he's serving, let him serve. If he's teaching, let him teach. If he's encouraging, let him encourage. If it's contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it's leadership, let him govern diligently. If it's showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. We want to honor our God by using our giftedness. I don't know how long it's been since you've thought about your gifts. All right. So if we're for a cappella singing, then we should be all about encouraging others to sing, to learn how to sing. We should offer them opportunities. How big an issue is really singing a cappella or instruments really? Well, it comes back to the scripture I started with, because this has to be fundamental to the study. How do we maintain unity? That's got to be our goal. He listed that first, and then he says there's one, one. So unity must be my goal. Why is the subject so divisive? By the way, I think it's less divisive than it was 30 years ago. But still, it can be divisive. Restoration churches. When I'm speaking about this, I'm going to put us back into the era of the 1860s. But in the 1860s, there were churches who agreed upon a philosophy that unity is our goal. Restoration is the means to get to the unity. The idea was we want to restore, we want to look. We don't know exactly how the first century church looked, but in some of the things we see, we want to be like them. Because at that time, churches had come over here to the colonies from different places in Europe, and they didn't like what they saw, and they said there has to be something biblically fundamental. And so they started going back to the basics. Jesus said this. This should be on every refrigerator. I pray also for those who believe in me, Jesus said, through their message. He's talking about the apostles. That all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. Notice the one is there again. May they also be in us, so the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me. You understand what he's saying? He has given them glory that they may be one as we are one. Jesus hasn't gone to the cross. And he's talking about the unity that's significant. I and them, you and me, may they be brought to complete unity to let the world know that you sent me and have loved me even as I have loved them. Notice he says, I pray that they'll believe on the message, so there's going to be a oneness. What does that oneness look like? Well, that oneness looks like the same thing that God and Christ and the Holy Spirit have together. So that the world may believe that you have sent me. I don't know how many times I've heard in my life, there are just so many brands of you. How can you have any idea to know what is right? And then the idea is of being unified, being one as God in Christ. We let the world know that God really did send Jesus with a purpose. What does this suggest to us? How do we do this? Is it possible? Or do you just give us something that, maybe it's okay? Stay with me. In John 17, he says, sanctify them through your truth. Your word is truth. Chat GPT is good. I had it made this thing for me. So I said, defines, anyway. I want to understand, take these, I don't know whether it's 10 or 12 pencils on one side, and you take 3 from it, and you have sanctified those principles. So now notice it, we go back and he says, sanctify them, set them apart. People that belong to Jesus are going to be set apart by the truth. Here, his word, he says, is truth. There's some people who don't believe in absolute truth today. The text that Robert read for us, Joel, I just got this week. I don't know how many times I've read this thing. But he said, be completely. I hate when I read something like that, Mike, and I go by it all these years, and I'm like, well, you think maybe the word completely is important in there? Be completely humble. Big slice of humble pie. That's for us guys. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Look at this. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Unity is an imperative. You know, it's not a good idea. It is an imperative. If I ask those of you who teach here, when's the last time you taught a class on what we're talking about today? It'd be 10 years? I've been here 10 years. I'm ashamed to say, but I got to looking through my stuff, and there was nothing in there. I'm like, well, why did you leave that one out? I don't know when anybody's taught about it. And so I'm saying this, if we assume somehow that we're going to get this through our spiritual DNA or our church DNA, then that doesn't work out terribly well. Restoration churches, sadly, did not remain in agreement on the idea of unity. They found it easier to bail and do other things. So in the 1860s, which is a little over a generation from when it began, the 1820s and 1830s, the idea of unity had already pretty much gone out the door, though there were still people who were working toward it. Lines that formed in the sand were formed primarily this way. There is the Christian church known as the Disciples of Christ. And I don't say this with any angst, is a pejorative, but they're the leftmost progressive wing. I took this off of their website. They are a slowly formed quasi-denominational structures. They have an earthly headquarters, and let me just read about it. The Reverend Teresa Hord Owens is the general minister and the president of the Christian churches or Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada. As a general minister, she is the general pastor of nearly 300,000 member churches across the USA and Canada. That's one. Then there's another group that refers to themselves as both the Church of Christ and the Christian. That group primarily would be distinguished by the last 100 years. They have just used an instrument. Then there's us, the Churches of Christ, who have maintained a cappella singing. I want to use a word. I want to try to define it because I may slip up and use it, and I want a working definition. Because I don't like the word conservative or liberal. It just doesn't work out very well for me. So here's what I'm going to try to say, that if you're conservative, you just won't change unless there's a good biblical reason. Now, that's not a perfect definition, so kind of remember that and work with me because I'm going to use it here again in just a moment. If we in the churches of Christ talked about other issues, not instrumental music, but if we talked about a host of other issues, then we actually represent the progressive wing of the church. Stay with me. Sort of like politics. You used to be one thing, now you're another. A big thing back in the 1860s was, can you have paid preachers? Another thing that they talked about was, can you have a fellowship hall and a kitchen? The key word, can you have a kitchen attached to the church building? I'm not making this up. I had a list of 50 and I erased it all but 3. Can you have separate Bible classes? Can we have, like we did this morning, in Bible classes, or do we have to have all the kids in here with us in one class? Adult stands up and teaches the class, and everybody from birth to death, they're in the same room. Now, the answer to them would be, the conservative would be, no, you can't do that. You can't have paid preachers. You can't have a kitchen attached to the building. So in some ways, we represent the groups, except for a cappella singing, and one that would be fundamentally unchangeable, and that is baptism for the forgiveness of sins, Acts chapter 2, verse 38. But on a cappella and a few of them, we are different. Some generations ago, lines were drawn in the sand and people had the reasons. By the way, people have the reasons. One of the reasons I'm discussing this, and I think from time to time it's good. I like to go sometimes and re-examine what I've taught. Rusty, I pull out a sermon, and I actually dumped all of them before I came here, but I pulled out some at one time, and I'm like, surely I didn't believe this. Surely I didn't say this. Surely I didn't teach this. So it's important for us to sometimes to take another look. Churches of Christ are not the only fellowship that comes to the conclusion that a cappella music is important. Others that use a cappella are the Eastern Orthodox. I'll expand on this in a moment, you'll see, but anything that has to do with Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, none of those groups use instruments of music. So in 27 BC to 30 AD, the Roman Empire was in Rome. When Constantine became the emperor in 330, he moved it to what was Constantinople, now Istanbul in Turkey. And it was that way until 1453, until the Ottomans or the Turks captured that. Now that gives you a little bit of division, but I think this map will help. If you look at the Catholic Church, everything westward, and you take the Orthodox, everything eastward, you see the divide. By the way, it even includes the Muslim world. The Muslims say, I forget the word, it's a sin to use instruments of music. So if you look at all of that, the light blue or the gray, that's the group in the world that still today does not use instruments of music. I'm about through. If you look at the history of Christianity, from the beginning of the day of Pentecost to the present, we would be in the majority. Now, I'm not concerned whether we're in the majority or the minority, but I'm just trying to throw out some figures so maybe you can wrap your mind around it. Instruments were obviously added at some point in time. We'll talk about this more later. But if you start in the Gospels, you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you won't find any discussion of it. You won't even find a discussion there of the instruments of music that they were commanded to use that were obviously there because Jesus went to the temple, but he never says anything about it. If you start reading in the book of Acts and you read all the way through the New Testament, you will not find any discussion of instruments of music. And we'll have more to say on this later. I'm just trying to get something out here in front of us that we can think about. And finally, Instruments have been added in the last couple of hundred years. Instruments came to America in about 1773, 74. They began to be reproduced in America in 1775. When I was a child, when some of us, our parents were children, there were very few in America that used instruments, primarily because they couldn't afford them. It wasn't necessarily a belief issue. I want to say one more thing about an appreciation for a cappella. I never fully understood this, but there was a period of time, for 7 years, I preached in a little town called Whiteface, Texas. It didn't even have a stoplight in it. If you blinked and drove by, it had 500 people if you threw in all the cats and the dogs and everybody. There were 4 churches in the town, but at least once a year, sometimes more, every time there was a funeral at the Baptist church, we were invited down to sing. And I always thought that was strange. We were happy to do so. And I asked a man one time, I said, I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand. I said, why would you sing with an instrument and then at your death, you're already dead, and now you want somebody to sing a cappella? And he said, we don't know. That's just the family's request. I don't bring that up as any pejorative. It's just something that I found in a small rural West Texas town, and they said, would you please come down and sing? And we were always happy to do so. So here's a list of those who sing a cappella in 2025. All the orthodoxies, that we just mentioned. The Primitive Baptist, the Anabaptist, the Amish, the Old German Baptist, the Old Order Mennonites, the Reformed Presbyterian Church of North America, and the Free Church of Scotland, and the Free Presbyterian Church of Scotland. Now, there's not a ton of those. There's some in America, but there are not a ton of those. And if you look, a lot of them are in another part of the world. But these are the dominant religious groups. They're not the dominant religious groups that you see in America today. So what we're seeing doesn't represent the historical trend, but it represents the current reality. And we'll have more to say on this next week. So I haven't talked about really what I would have liked to talk about this morning would have been Jesus. I don't know what you know about him. I don't know if you know the real Jesus. I found out growing up that the Jesus I have come to know now is different than what I thought he was a good portion of my life. If you don't know this Jesus, would you come up and talk to one of us, tap us on the shoulder? We won't embarrass you. Honest to God, we won't embarrass you. We'll share with you what Jesus has done for us, and that's all. But we'd like that opportunity. If you know what Jesus wants you to do, you're convinced in your heart, we'll help you that become a reality this morning. If you need the prayers of the church, you want a church home, let us know while we stand and sing.